So from our shelter-in-place studios in our homes, I'm Vanessa Chan from Kinetic Creators. And today we're going to be talking to Dave Pakman, who currently is a partner at Venrock and is recognized as one of the top 100 venture capitalists in the world. He's a visionary and co-created Apple's music group and then went on to build the world's leading digital retailer of independent music, eMusic. And as one of the giants behind internet music streaming, he had the honor of testifying in front of Congress multiple times as the industry was forming. So Dave, welcome to Kinetic Creators. We are thrilled to have you here.
I am thrilled to be here. Hi, everybody.
So our target listeners are college students who are looking to create something from nothing. And oftentimes they see things that others don't as they start pursuing their idea. And they talk about it, and as they do, they likely will hear a lot of naysayers who think their idea is stupid and they're wasting their time. I'm sure you're kind of smirking as you hear this, because we have a really good friend, mutual friend, Phil, who you've known since high school and I've known for over a decade. And I remember when he was talking about, he said, yeah, I have this friend Dave who had this crazy idea to blast music into space through rockets or something, and then he would download it from this magical cloud. I have no idea what he's talking about, but he went after it anyway, and it looks like he did okay. So, bring us back to that conversation with Phil. How did you know internet music streaming was the way to go when a lot of people, including one of your closest friends, thought you're a bit nutso?
Well, so I first became aware really of what was happening with the commercialization of the internet in the mid-90s. I was working at Apple as a product manager working on software products. And like you were able to download the first web browser, and you could see that by connecting to another computer and seeing a bunch of text and images load in real quickly, that the newspaper was instantly doomed, right? Like this was what was called the atoms to bits moment, right? Where physical goods don't need to be created and moved over the roads and trucks to get to you if I can get information to you digitally over wires. And so this was an obvious, once you saw that happen, it was obvious that, well, if text and images can move so quickly over an internet wire, so too will any digital file. And music by the 90s had already been digitized and was sold on CDs, which was just a plastic carrier of a bunch of digital files. So it was obvious to me that music distribution would turn digital also. That was not a profound realization at all. It was an obvious one to anyone paying attention. You probably could have predicted that video would come after that, right? Once enough bandwidth was available online. So I don't think it was a crazy idea to say that music was going to be downloaded digitally instead of sold on CDs. And similarly, once you saw the download revolution happen, which it did, streaming is just really progressive downloading. It's just, sending little bits of the file down moment by moment on demand. So it was also obvious once, if you paid any attention, that as bandwidth, particularly mobile bandwidth and connectivity increased, then music was going to switch from a download model to a streaming model. It's just more convenient. And so that's the story of all media. It went from physical goods to digital downloads to streaming today. And that concept actually of switching from sort of one-time downloads to streaming can apply to a lot of things other than just media. Like one thing I'm pretty fond of is there's this notion of streaming payments. So if you've ever held a job and get a paycheck, how often does the paycheck come? It's like once every 2 weeks or twice a month, right? Well, why? Well, because there's an expense to like cutting checks or doing a payroll run. But why should you be in arrears for 2 weeks? You worked for your employer, they didn't pay you. They could pay you every day if it was really cheap to send 1 day's worth of payment to you, right? A salary of 1 day. Or why is it daily? Why not hourly or minutely and by the minute? So I think that's going to happen. I think we will start to be able to receive compensation in a stream rather than by chunks.
So it makes a lot of sense what you say. Like you see one part kind of dying and you start applying to different places, but there's a lot of barrier to that, right? I just finished cleaning out my basement. I'm sure many of us are doing that with COVID and you're kind of stuck. And I found all those jewel cases with the CDs, which I was about to throw away until my kid was like, wait a minute, I need these for a Rube Goldberg machine. And they're, by the way, fantastic dominoes. And then she's like, what are these? I had to explain to them what they are. And so there must have been some backlash, right? Like, obviously there's an entire supply chain that was, doing CDs at this point. So talk to me a little bit about how do you really kind of get over the barriers to change? Because even though it might have been obvious to you, there's all kinds of people like, no way we should be doing this. So tell me about that.
Yeah, certain change is inevitable. It will happen. But the question is on what time frame? We're going through this moment right now with social justice, right? Like I don't mean to bring this up so early in the conversation, but I think we know that sort of progressive rights, the future bends towards them over time, but it takes a long time sometimes for big societal change to happen. The same is true of business models sometimes. And sometimes it can happen overnight. So you as an entrepreneur have to make some educated guess about, can I affect this change? Can I make something happen more quickly than I otherwise would and be the beneficiary of it? And so this brings me to this major theme of how to decide what types of companies to work on. One question we always ask is your idea permissionless? And so we prefer permissionless innovation to permission-based innovation. And I'll give you an example. Sometimes you might have an idea, but it's to execute it, it's dependent on somebody else giving you the right or permission to do it. So an example of that is digital music. If you want to sell digital downloads or create Spotify, you can build some amazing piece of software that can stream music, but you don't have the rights to any of the music. So you have to go to the record labels and the music publishers and the independent labels and the artists, and you got to convince them to give you permission to do that. You got to get them to sign an agreement with you, and they have leverage over you at that moment. And so that's an example of where it's not permissionless innovation. Your business is totally dependent on effectively the largesse of a bunch of other people in the ecosystem. So sometimes that's fine, but suppose your idea would disrupt them and hurt them. Then why in the world would they voluntarily want to work with you and enable you? So this is an important filter an entrepreneur has to ask themselves, can I create this product on my own and bring it to market? And if it's great, it will be adopted and I'll be successful. Or do I need permission from other people first? And are they likely to give it to me? Is it in their interest to give it to me? And I think this goes to this question, Vanessa, about just because you have a wacky idea, is it actually going to happen? A lot of it has to do with, can you bring it to market yourself and test it and see, or do you need other people to agree to let it happen?
So you went after this where obviously you needed permission, right? Because you were building out e-music. So talk to us about, now that you know it's hard to invest in something and push it through if you need permission, what gave you the gumption to be like, you know what, I can do this. I can disrupt it. I can push this through.
Yeah, well, I didn't think this way back then. This is a lesson I learned through being an entrepreneur in the digital media space. I will not invest in, nor would I ever start a company unless its basis was permissionless innovation. But when you are in a situation where you're going to need someone's support, as we were with eMusic, well, I would argue actually first, the company I started before that, which was called MyPlay, which was really the one that Phil was referring to. This was really just a cloud locker service for your music. It was a place to store your downloads. So if you bought a bunch of downloads or downloaded a bunch of music off Napster, there were no streaming services yet. So MyPlay was a place that you uploaded all of your MP3s to so they could stream back to you. It was like poor man's streaming. And in that case, we didn't need anyone's permission. That was a permissionless product. If you downloaded the song, you owned it, and then you could upload it to our hard drives and store them there. So that was an easier product to bring to market because we didn't need people's permission. But in the case of eMusic, we did. We need record labels and publishers to go along. And then you have to ask your question, well, what's in it for them? And am I disrupting them or am I helping them? And in the case of eMusic, our argument was we were helping them. We're just helping them sell more music. They should want to license us. But a lot of incumbents are scared. Oh, you're muted, Vanessa. You asking a question?
No, go ahead.
Okay. you have to ask yourself if the incumbent, a lot of incumbent companies, legacy companies, are scared of change. They're resistant to change. They like to exercise their power to prevent change, even if it may be in their best interest, because they don't know a lot about it. They're scared to change. So it can be hard to convince other companies to work with you, even if you think it's in their best interest.
So you said something important here, which is you now are a little bit wiser, having gone through this, and you only invest in companies that aren't permissionless, or are permissionless.
Yeah.
And so I kind of want to take you back to your very early days, right? So tell me about how early an entrepreneur you were, and like, what was the very first entrepreneurial thing you did?
I mean, I guess, shoveling driveways is probably, shoveling snow was like the first, like, let me go out and, have a tiny little company, right? Try to sell your services. That was probably the first, rite of passage. But I was not, there are these people who, have started 10 companies by the time they get to college. Like that was not me. I followed a pretty typical path compared to, for most Silicon Valley entrepreneurs. I got a computer science degree. I went to Apple. I met a bunch of brilliant people who were much smarter than I was. They became my mentors. I learned from them. I learned about how to bring products to market, how to do software development, how to analyze markets, how to be a product manager. And then I left and joined a startup and watched a startup happen. Then I left and started my own company. So that arc, I think, is pretty typical. But I wasn't one of those, I'm going to be self-made by the time I'm 25 and, was an entrepreneur from birth.
So let's talk about transition, right? You said a couple of things I want to unpack. One is you talked about mentors, right? Relationships are really important in the real world, and especially when you're pretty young, sponsorship is pretty critical. So as you talk about kind of the arc of your journey, is there someone that really kind of jumps out to be like, you know what, that's the person that made the difference, where I went from kind of my normal path to having the courage to do something differently?
Yeah, I think so. I was lucky in that one of the things I recommend to people is out of college, is to work at a company that hires really smart people and trains them well, because you will, by definition, be around people who are older than you and really super smart and well connected, and they're well trained. So you can observe from them and learn from them. I don't know who would want to work at Facebook at this particular moment, but graduating and working at Facebook, the company is extraordinarily good at hiring very bright people, at allowing lots of independence and teaching really disciplined product development, in fantastic continuous integration, continuous deployment, software architecture. I mean, really, you become best in class at your job. And you're surrounded by really great people who are more experienced than you are. So they kind of become de facto mentors just because they're around you. I was lucky that happened to me at Apple. And the people who were, 3 to 6 years older than I was have remained sort of mentors to me. The person who I still work with to this day was the guy who hired me at Apple. I was first hired out of Penn as a summer intern for a summer of my junior year. And the guy who hired me also hired me back full time when I graduated. And he was just great, just, took a liking to young talent, wanted to train you, was supportive, but, kind of kept the guardrails on you and helped you out. And I learned so much from him that I've called him into 2 of my companies to help, teach them, mentor them, help the CEO. So that person was a big influence on my career.
So I think mentorship is something which seems pretty scary to people around, like trying to find a mentor. They've heard they need a mentor. What's the best way to go about getting one? Now that, you and I are older, people come and try to, have us be mentors. What are some kind of good pickup lines or ways that people have approached you to have you mentor them?
Yeah, first, have the courage to ask, right? I think, Vanessa, we talked about this when we were last together at Penn Engineering. You're definitely not going to get someone to mentor you if you don't ask. So you kind of have nothing to lose. So start asking people. And if they're really good, they'll respond and say, what do you mean by that? Like, tell me what you're looking for. What type of guidance? Do you want to talk every week? Do you want to be able to come to me once a month or once a quarter with progress in your career? Do you want to just use me as somebody you can bounce ideas off of when you're making career choices? What are you looking for? And I think you can have different types of mentors in your life at different times that do different things for you. Um, I think I first thought of mentors as just someone who can help you avoid making a bad mistake, right? Like a career choice that doesn't make a lot of sense because you don't know any better. They could say, let me tell you why this is not a great company, or let me tell you why that particular role is not a great role. I'll give you an example. Um, hey, I'm a really good communicator, and so I've been offered this sales role at this company. I never thought I was going to go into sales. I'm more interested in marketing or something else, communications or product, but I like this company. Should I take a sales role? So that's like a pretty uh, important moment to check yourself on, right? Like, I'm making, it's like a path decision. Do I want to go become a salesperson? And there's some really good things about that. And there's some that can be a dead end for a lot of careers. So like, that's something you want to talk to a mentor about because you're not wise enough. So I guess people have just, when people ask me, can you be a mentor to me? I ask, what are you looking for? And usually the answer is yes, if it's something I can actually be helpful with. Um, I don't know, that's my answer. Do you have any good pickup lines?
No, I mean, I think part of what I find with mentorship is when people realize it's a two-way street, right?
Yeah.
Where, people are coming and saying, look, I see this about you and I'd love to help you here. And as
Mhm.
they're helping to build something or do something that I'm interested in, I naturally will start mentoring them. And
Mhm.
so I think the two-way street type of mentoring is the ones which I think are the richest. I don't know if you have examples of that, but for example, the two young brothers who are on with me right now, like they're learning how to do podcasts and all that. And so we're doing this together and they're mentoring me and I'm mentoring them. And so I think that's a really good relationship. So do you have examples of that?
Yeah,
That
totally.
you
Yeah.
to?
So I've been in venture for 11 years now, and I'm considered older for sure in venture. Like, I'm 50 years old and I'm an old guy, but venture is a career of experience, right? Where like acquiring knowledge through reps really, you get wise in this business the more you do it. So young people who have, like, let's say you're 25 to 32 and you're somehow landed in a job in venture, you have really interesting perspectives on life and your peers and what's happening, and you've got probably a better compass on where the future is going because the internet is built on what young people are doing. But you don't have the wisdom yet. So a lot of young people in venture want venture mentors. So, but I benefit from talking to young people who are really wise about technology because they can say, no, you don't get it. That's not happening anymore. This is what people are doing. And, I get that from my kids, but I like to spend a lot of time with younger people, particularly younger people who are wise about tech. So I started a group actually of like 8 or 9 other young people in venture, probably, I don't know their ages, but, average age, maybe 30 and maybe a little bit younger. And they think it's awesome because we meet once a month, like on Zoom now. And they think it's awesome. Like, they get to talk to an old guy in venture. He's so wise and has a bunch of successes. But for me, it's definitely a two-way street because I'm like, what are you guys thinking about? What are the new products? What's interesting? What areas are you psyched about? What are your friends doing? So there's a good, dichotic relationship there.
Yeah, my heart almost broke when Ren told me that Facebook is Instagram for old people. so,
And
so I think
Instagram,
it's good to
now
have.
Instagram is TikTok for old people.
No, exactly. So anyway, it's like, generations are kind of, moving past us, which is kind of scary. Um, So you talked about transitions as well, right? Like when you're looking to go into a new role or things like that's a good time to talk to mentors. You've had some pretty interesting transitions yourself, right? You've talked about a little bit the arc of your career. How did you know when it was the right time to do these transitions, right? When you went from N2K to founding MyPlay, right? You went from a steady paycheck to being building something. And you went from a CEO of eMusic where you're operating, right, to actually becoming a partner at Venrock where you're investing in operators and other people's companies. So that's also a big switch. So how did you know the time was right to do something different?
Sometimes the change is forced on you, like the company you're working at has layoffs or um, goes out of business. sometimes the product you're working on ships and it's like a natural break point, right? There are natural transitions in one's career. And so those are obvious moments for you to take stock of where you are and think about what you're doing next. But then there are other times when you're observing the macro environment and around you, and you're like, this is happening and I want to be a part of it. So, the shift to mobile is one of those moments, right? When the iPhone came out and this entire new platform was launched. A lot of people changed jobs because they wanted to be a part of the mobile revolution. The same thing happened around VR. You saw tons of people jump into VR. Thus far, that has not really become a mainstream platform, but there was a big movement to that. Saw the same thing around crypto, 2015, 2016, 2017, like this is a new thing, I want to jump in. So there are exogenous events that happen where you're like, look, I just believe in this thing and I want to get on the boat. So I think both are valid reasons to take stock about what you're doing and consider a transition, whether it's forced on you or it's opportunistic. In my case, I would say most of my transitions coincided with a somewhat convenient moment of either the company reached a natural stage where it could, when I left eMusic, I had been there for 5 years. We got to 80 or 90 million in revenue. It felt like the business was pretty stable. It felt like a good time. CEOs have to be careful. You can't just leave. So it felt like a natural time to begin a transition. So I left my play after we sold it, right? So there are these forced transitions on you.
And when you transition to something new, it's kind of scary, right? Because you have no idea what you're doing originally. So talk to me about that. Like when you go into something and you have no clue what you're doing, taking that first couple of steps, how does that feel?
Well, one of the problems or challenges is like, how much money do you have? So how long a transition can you take, right? Like if you have a high burn rate or live in a really expensive city and you're paying rent, which we all are, in an apartment, you might not be like, yeah, I can chill for 6 months and try to find the next great job. Most of us can't do that. In fact, one study we did on what is predictive of entrepreneurs, like you always want to know, like what are the key ingredients that go into successful entrepreneurs? One of them is economic flexibility, to be able to take time off without a salary to go and try to start a company, because there's some period of months or longer where you're not getting paid yet. So some of your ability to make thoughtful transitions is dictated by how much cushion you have financially, whether that's self-made cushion of your own savings or parents who can help you out or some other support structure. So I think that's the first thing, is how much time can I afford to take? Because the more time you have, the more options you can create for yourself. If you've read the Steven Johnson book on decision-making, the number one way to make a better decision is to create more options. It's so obvious when you hear that, but most of us don't do that as a matter of practical implementation. But career choices are pretty major changes in your life. And so, boy, rather than to have only one job offer, you'd rather have 3. But to get 3 job offers hit simultaneously, a lot of work has to go into it and a lot of luck has to happen. But I think those are, you want to create the most number of options. And for that, you're going to need to have time. The last way I think a lot of people have transitions is when it's sort of, it comes to you, like a friend of yours left the company and is working at another company and sort of calls you and says, this place is great, you should come over. So there's a single choice, do I stay or do I go? But it's not like you went to the market and interviewed for 10 other jobs to see what else was out there. So sometimes we make these decisions on imperfect information.
So I really like that point that you made around trying to create options. And, part of it is, to your point, on like, how long can you live without having a lot of money? And so I think really encouraging our students right now, when you get that big signing bonus, don't go out and buy that brand new car that you're thinking about. Keep it, right? Invest it maybe in something that's a little on the safe side. And then as you get compound interest and it grows, you just have that option to have a longer runway. Yeah. And so I think that's great, because when you get that first signing bonus, it's pretty tempting to go spend it somewhere. So that's good. So talk to me a little bit about failure as well. It's something I like to talk with people that I interview, because usually people talk about their successes. And I'm sure when they, became one of the top 100 venture capitalists, the press release didn't talk about all your failures, out there. And so this is happy hour, and, you can have a drink because it's 6:30 p.m. over the East Coast. What's the failure you want to share with all your close friends on this call right now? Something where it was like really spectacular and, it was pretty humbling, but you learned and grew from it.
I have so much failure in my life. I mean, we all do. I've had way more failure as a venture capitalist than really any other job I've had. The odds are that I will. So at least I'm not doing worse than the numbers. I'm actually doing better than the numbers, but still, better than the odds. But still, in venture, most of your investments fail because most startups fail. Like, the overwhelming odds are that you won't be successful. And so even just because we back you doesn't mean you will. So it's taken me 11 years to try to get comfortable with that. And I'm still not fully there. I mean, I still get a huge pit in my stomach when a company I'm investing in, I've already invested in, is not doing well. And it happens all the time. So if you're not comfortable with failure and knowing that you suck, then don't become a venture capitalist. In fact, this is really what distinguishes the best entrepreneurs from the merely mortal ones, which is your comfort with failure and your likelihood that you will stand up again and run through the wall again, because you will keep hitting the wall and you've got to figure out a way to get through it or jump over it or go around it. And the most determined entrepreneurs, which tend to be really competitive people who have something to prove, don't allow that setback to kill them, but figure out a way to get through it. And my job as a venture capitalist is to back those people. So even though you may try to back them all the time, you're not going to be successful. So I've failed plenty of times. My worst failure is, I invested in Nest and then Dollar Shave Club, and both were, successes. And, the Nest model was these incredible people who came out of Apple who, defined a totally new, awesome category and basically built an iPhone and put it on your wall. And they were super right, and the product took off. It was a hit. The same situation presented itself to me where a group from Apple left, brilliant product people, and they wanted to help make existing cars more like Teslas. They wanted to sell accessories for existing cars to make them progressively more autonomous. Like, give them some of the autonomous driving features of a Tesla, like lane keeping or autopilot type functions. And the argument was, like, if eventually autonomous cars are sold at the rate of the number of new cars sold per year, which is like 45 million new cars a year sold worldwide, or like 14 or 15 or 17 million in the US, it would take like 43 years for the 1.2 billion cars in the world to become autonomous. Well, why do we want to wait 43 years if autonomous cars come? Because they're so much safer. So their argument was, we want to help retrofit existing cars to become autonomous. And they were going to build these elegant, beautiful products that would progress, sell them as accessories to your existing car. Well, they raised $53 million because everyone wanted to back them. It's a brilliant team from Apple going after one of the largest markets in the world. And they built their first product. And when they shipped it, they sold 2,000 units. It was a complete and utter failure. And the company, we tried to do everything we could to save the company. We even tried to just sell the team to like Google or someone great, and no one bought the team. We lost the company buried $53 million, and Venrock lost $15 million. It was the biggest check I ever wrote as a venture capitalist. Total failure.
So why do you think it failed? What was it that made it fail?
It's actually very easy. They spent way too much money on a product before they knew whether they had product market fit. You can't spend $53 million to find out whether people want your product or not. You just can't do that. You got to spend like $5.3 million to figure that out.
So how big was it when that was happening?
How did it feel?
Yeah, how did it feel?
It wasn't really apparent to me that we were going to lose everything until the very, very end, because even when it was clear the product sucked and they couldn't, they tried to put together all these other product plans. I was like, okay, well, we'll just sell the company. Like someone's going to buy this technology and this team. And even the other people around the company were like, oh, we're going to be able to sell this for hundreds of millions just because of the team. And like, there was no one interested. So that was it felt terrible. Now, I think the only reason I was able to kind of live to fight another day is because I had just, sold Dollar Shave Club for $1 billion and we made $150 million from that. And so like, with a big win like that, you can afford some losses. In fact, it was only probably because I had the success behind me that I felt I could take a big enough risk on this company. But, it sucked. It was really bad.
And it's interesting because most college students are very afraid of failure, right? Like we've set up our entire system that way, where when you're in high school, you want to make sure you get the perfect GPA, perfect SAT score. You come to college, there's this GPA that people are very much obsessed with. So what can college students do to better prepare themselves for being resilient and being accepting of failure? Because to your point, everybody fails, and the entrepreneurs who can get up from that are the ones who are going to do well. So, but psychologically, we're not helping them shape them that way. So what can they do on their own to get themselves there?
Well, you got to have you have to have a failure, first of all, right? To figure out how you're going to respond to it. So how do you have a failure? Well, you have to take a little bit of risk. You have to be willing to do something that you're not 100% sure you're going to succeed at. So you might start by asking yourself, how often do I do things that I'm not, 90% sure of or better I'm going to succeed at? And if your answer is never, well, then you're not really taking a lot of risk in life. Now, it may not be in your personality to feel comfortable taking risk. I mean, I think there has been a bunch of studies on sort of the psychology. Like we all have different brains. Some of us are more comfortable taking risk than others. So it'd be good to know this part about you. But if you are willing to take some risk, look, the adages are true. I mean, like the people who succeed the most are the ones who take risk, right? You have to do something that's unsafe. It's not just a pure safe path to be overwhelmingly successful. And, let's just look at Elon. I mean, this guy has the biggest brass rockets you can imagine, and is taking more risk, I think, than professional risk than anyone I think ever has. I mean, I can't, on a scale that is almost, I think it's incomparable. So there's obviously something warped in his brain that gives him this incredible comfort to take these risks. And thank God for all of us that he has that warped brain. But we can look at people like that, and he's had plenty of failures. I mean, he's had rockets blow up. And he's been, inches from bankruptcy multiple times, but he refuses to fail. So I take two things away from that. One is, obviously he's got a high appetite for risk. But the second is, why is he comfortable with the risks he's taking? And when you ask him that question, and he has been asked that a number of times, he says things like, well, the first principles tell me it's possible. And so as science-based people, you have to ask yourself that question. Like, if the laws of physics tell you you can't do that, well, then it doesn't matter how much willpower you have. You're not going to be able to will it into existence. But his point is, if the laws of physics say it can be done, then the rest is the willpower and the creativity and the tenacity and the assembling the resources and convincing the people in your way to get out of your way and all that stuff, right? Yeah, you need luck. So I think it depends what you want out of life. But if you want to make a difference, if you want to, look, this as hardworking students, you feel the best when you do something hard, right? Don't you? I mean, it's through accomplishment of a really hard task that you feel the best. Doing the easy things, you're like, yeah, okay. So I think it's universally true. I mean, maybe we don't all design our lives that way, but all these adages about push yourself and take some risk, they are the things that will either produce a failure, in which case you've got to learn how to deal with it, or teach you how to have, the tenacity to get back up and move through it to the next thing.
And one of the things that I've really appreciated about you is you're a whole person, right? And what I mean by that is you have this illustrative career, you've done all these things, but you also have a lot of fun, right? You're a DJ, you have a band. So tell me a little bit about that, because I've seen thousands of resumes, as I'm sure you have, and I feel like the interest in many students right now is not there. Like, you're not seeing kind of a whole person. You're seeing someone who's done a lot of studying and kind of the shiny resume stuff. So talk to me a little bit about, how you've managed to kind of stay a whole person and stay interesting, through this illustrative career.
I don't know that that's been as, something that I've had a lot of control over. Like, I don't know that our passions are something that we can manifest. I don't know. Like, you certainly have to expose yourself to things. Like, how do you know that you like to sail unless you actually try sailing, right? And how do you know you like to play lacrosse unless you actually try lacrosse? So you do have to expose yourself to things. But I don't think you can make yourself love something. I don't know. Maybe you can. I don't know if people have done studies on that. But I guess my view is your passions are the things that kind of, things that resonate with you, that are things you really want to spend your time doing a lot more of. So I'm just lucky. I've had a bunch of those. A lot of them have to do with music and entertainment. But there's a lot of things in life that I like. I guess maybe I would say I'm not so sure, Vanessa, like, this is a great thing in that, like, there are people like, I don't think Elon Musk has a lot of hobbies, right? Like, the guy works like, I don't know, 20 hours a day on two companies plus the boring company. He doesn't like jam with a rock band on the weekends. So there are extraordinary people who don't have maybe some of these other dimensions. I just have a bunch of interests that I would have been unwilling to subjugate entirely to my job. So that might be, you might say that that's selfishness, or maybe it's a lack of willpower. I don't know, what multidimensionality, I don't know what you call it, but I don't think I have had any control over that. It's just a personal fire inside. And so, look, I've got a bunch of interests and I've focused on them. I think the thing that's been most revealing to so many of us in the last 10 years is this concept of neuroplasticity, that you actually can get good at things by doing a lot of reps on them. And once you hear that and you believe it, then it's like, well, hang on, I'm not born with inalienable expertise. I can actually, I have to just work at things. And so things that I'm passionate about, I can go spend a bunch more time and I'll get better at them. That's like such a freeing, incredible moment. Like, all right, so what am I interested in? I need to go spend time on those things and I'll get better at them. I might even become great. So I think that's that's what makes life really exciting, is that we just need reps.
And that's probably a great way, for you to also get into that growth mindset and not be afraid of failure, right? Because if you have an interest and the stakes are lower, if it's a hobby, right, that might help connect to the other parts where the stakes are higher. So that makes a ton of sense to me.
That's a great idea. I will say, as a venture capitalist, my partners early on would say things to me like encouraging me, like, do more. Like, if you get interested in something, like, go spend 2 days of sleepless nights doing it. Like, I get this way every couple months where I'm like, oh, I mean, when deep neural networks started to become a thing a couple years ago, I'm like, I have to learn about convolutional neural networks. I got to figure out how to train, TensorFlow. I got to figure this out. So I spent like a week. I just I cleared my schedule, cleared my meeting, just sat and, worked on a model to do some image recognition. And by the end of the week, guess what? I knew a lot about neural networks, not having taken a class, which I could have done if I was in school. And well, guess what? That really helped me look at AI companies. So I think there are benefits actually to going deep on stuff that you may not be able to see right away.
That's awesome. And I really hope it inspires people to just try some things that you may not even realize that you have interest in. To your point, it only took you 1 week, right? To get to learn something. So it's not a lot of time. So one of my favorite parts of the interview is what we call the domino interview. And what we do is we have quite a few CEOs, founders, entrepreneurs like you who are excited to share their journey. And what we do is we ask them a question to ask our next interviewee. Mm-hmm. So in that spirit, our previous interviewee was Patrice Banks, who's the CEO and founder of Girls Auto Clinic, where she's disrupting the male auto industry through a repair shop that is run by women, designed by women. And so her question to you is, Everyone has a story that leads to a set of beliefs that guides you. If you could create an ad campaign that includes billboards, ads, and a 30-second commercial that everyone in the world would see, what would you say?
So you gave me some advance warning here. So I have two thoughts on this. The simple one is, be comfortable being uncomfortable, which is, back to this theme of like, put yourself out there, do stuff that's hard, take risks. You'll only grow if you're going to be uncomfortable. And once I really learned and embraced that, my life got a lot easier. I was able to discern moments that are uncomfortable and actually turn into them and say, like, I put myself here. I want to be here. This is hard, and I want to be in this hard situation. I'm not going to flee from it. I'm going to rise from it. I'm going to meet the challenge. I will grow from it. Worst case is I fail. And so that, like, what's incredible to me is that's totally in your mind. You can decide to do this if you want. It's helped with everything. Like, I mean, look, how many, you're at an exercise class and you're doing a plank and you've reached the point where you're ready to stop and your mind is telling you this hurts, you should stop. But like, the truth is your body could go for like another 3 minutes. It definitely can. Doesn't matter what shape you're in, you could, but your mind is uncomfortable. So you could choose to tell yourself, yes, this is uncomfortable. My mind is telling me to quit. I'm not going to right now. I'm going to keep going. And as painful and discomforting as it is, you are getting comfortable being uncomfortable. So for me, that's been an amazing mind-opening point of view. And I'd put that on billboards. But that's more about a personal growth thing. So I thought your question might also be one about it's just purely professional things you've learned. And I would say, this is not billboardish, but big companies like incumbents, they move slowly. They take very little risk. They will not self-disrupt. They will not self-cannibalize. And they have incentives that really prevent them culturally from innovating and changing. So they make for really great targets for entrepreneurs. I've seen it over and over again. Don't be scared of the big guy. They're sitting ducks.
That is really good advice, because we have a couple of startups that are starting to talk to the big guys. And so I think it's good for them to have that framing. Really good. So I'm going to flip it back to you, which is for our next interviewee, who we don't know who that is yet. What question would you like to ask that person?
Yeah, mine was going to be, tell me the experience in your life where you were the most uncomfortable.
That's a good one. Can I flip that question back to you? What was your experience that was
Ooh,
most uncomfortable?
I don't know if I have a good answer for that.
Because you've learned to be comfortable in all uncomfortable situations, right?
Well, I'm not fully comfortable every time, but that's my goal, right? The goal is to, people tell me that I look cool as a cucumber, even when I'm super nervous inside. I think that's me just trying to compensate, like not show that I'm totally shaking and freaking out, because maybe I perceive that as like weakness. And so I want to show that I'm strong. I got it under control, but I don't have it under control. I don't know. Well, I don't know. Let's see what comes up to me. I'm just not prepared for that question.
That's fascinating. That's your question. You haven't thought about it for yourself. But what do you do to not freak out? Because I think all of us go through that moment. We have the sweaty palms. We think we're about to vomit. What do you do to just kind of stay cool, calm, and collected?
Yeah, two things. One is obviously breathe, right? Try to slow your breathing down. The whole body responds nicely to that. A little meditation kind of thing. But the other thing I say is particularly if I'm about to go on stage and play, or if I'm going to, give a presentation in front of a big audience or something like that, or go live on TV, or is an appreciation that nervous energy that actually is the gift. Like, that's what makes you super pay attention, be aware, your brain's firing, the neurons are going. Like, that's what it's actually meant for, right? Like those the endorphins are there to like get the body firing, waking it up. So I've learned to say, like, thank you for this. This is great that I'm tingling and super nervous, because it's making me on, right? That's when you're on. If I was sleepy and bored, I'd be the worst person on stage or terrible on TV, or, so I'm thankful for it.
That's awesome. So we have a couple extra minutes. I wanted to open this up to our students to see if they have any questions for Dave. You can put them in the chat and Dave can take a look at them and decide what he wants to answer.
Thanks for the Wayne Gretzky, Michael Scott quote, Desmond.
If Anisha's still on, I think, yeah. Do you want them to unmute and
Yeah, go
ask?
ahead, Anisha. Good question.
Yeah, so I had a quick question. So over the past year, I've gone through a fair number of co-founders that have came and went as I pivoted the business from a music betting app to a Tinder for music to now computer vision-based product filters. And I still haven't cracked screening for dedication in co-founders. So I was wondering if you had any good tips on that.
Mm. I sympathize with that being a hard thing. No one will ever have the same level of passion and dedication about your idea that you have because it was your idea, right? But I think you're right to be aware of it. My guess is that the default will be someone who is not going to have the level of passion that you have about and dedication to something. So maybe the first question to ask yourself is, do I need a co-founder? I mean, maybe I'm just hiring really good, skilled people into these jobs that I need around me, but I don't need them to be a co-founder, meet the definition of, incredibly dedicated, will live through any rainstorm, will mortgage their house or, move to a shack or, spend all of their last pennies on this idea, which would be my definition of a co-founder. So maybe that's really not what you're looking for. That maybe be the first question I'd ask. The second is sort of a question back to you. Is the problem that you've pivoted the business, so therefore the original co-founder is no longer as passionate because it's not the original idea?
So I guess that's partially the case. The original two pivots didn't really work out, so I guess they might have just gotten tired of pivoting.
Yeah.
But
So
I'm pretty excited about this new direction.
Okay. Well, I'm, you don't always need a co-founder. In fact, you might argue that you should be looking for people to hire, and only if they show some extraordinary level of dedication, ambition, and belief, then you would consider them as a possible co-founder.
So basically you're saying, Dave, like they should put them through a dating phase before they get married, right?
Yeah, for sure. That's true. But I'm just saying maybe you're looking for the wrong thing. Maybe you actually don't need a co-founder. You just need super competent executive team around you to write code and help with product.
Okay, thank you so much.
And Dave, are there things that you can do to protect yourself? You mentioned don't go straight into co-founders. Are there other things that they should be thinking about just to make sure they don't get themselves in a pickle?
It's really a question about learning about another person, right? Trying to figure everything that you can figure out about them, made even harder in the time of COVID where we can't spend time together and read each other in person. I don't know that I have any great pearls of wisdom, except that I think that they say that I've thought a lot about and learned a lot about hiring in the last 10 years. And one thing they say is, a whisper in an interview is a shout in real life. So, and another thing that people say is actually your gut is a very good determining factor in reading people, because we're humans, we're really good at reading people. So like you should feel confident in your early impressions of people, like that they're likely right on. And if there's a tell in that meeting, like that bothers you or you think is indicative of someone who's not going to work out, then that's definitely true. It won't. Right? That's a whisper that's going to become a shout.
And that's where, to your point, if you don't have someone as a co-founder, but hire them maybe for 3 months at a time, during that 3 months, they can't keep their guard up the whole time. So you'll get a better sense of what's really going on.
Yes, and also when raising money, the stories that play much better are, we're two co-founders. We worked together for 4 years at this last company. Like, we've already worked out all of our kinks.
Alexa, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. So it's definitely more specific to my team's idea, but I think can apply to other people's as well. So my team actually came out of a hackathon, and we're building a COVID-related website that uses some AI technology to kind of match between hospitals and medical workers that are in understaffed areas. So one thing that stood out about what you were talking about was talking about how it's very challenging to work in a permission-based business. So our model definitely is dependent on hospitals opting in. And although we're not really disrupting the hospital industry, we're trying to like add reform to it. What would be some strategies in terms of best presenting ourselves to the businesses as adding something to them instead of like trying to disrupt them?
Yeah, it's a great question. I find that the most valuable advice, it comes from people who have worked at the target. So if a hospital, or so people who have held senior positions there, who you can say, what would your response be if I came to you with this pitch? They would say, oh, we would never even take the meeting. That's totally irrelevant to what we do. Okay, what would you say if we came to you with this pitch? Oh, well, that's interesting because, you know, right now the biggest problem we have is X, and that seems to sort of solve our problem. I'll give you another example. Early in my venture career, one investment theme that a bunch of other investors had was basically looking at all the features that Amazon had, productizing them, and trying to sell those features to all the other e-tailers, because every other e-tailer sucks and doesn't have the R&D teams that Amazon has, and you're going to have the same features as Amazon, but you don't have the capability of developing it. So why don't we just sell all that to everyone else? And so it sounds like a good idea, right? Well, here's the problem, is that whenever you go and call those retailers and you say to them, hey, what do you think about, what about this feature? We call it subscribe and save. People can either buy the product once, or if it's a replenishment product, you can show right on the web page, like click here to have it sent to you every 1 month or 3 months or something. And then you guys get repeat sales and the customer doesn't have to remember to reorder. What do you think of that? And guess what the other retailers say? That's a great idea. We're so interested. That's really cool. Okay. And then you say, all right, great. Well, what priority would this be for you in your list of things to do? And they say, oh, yeah, okay, hold on, 25. Because we have all these other things we have to get done. And so there's an example where if you had worked in a retailer and you test drove this idea, someone knowledgeable would say to you, yeah, they're all going to say yes, they want it, and they'll never be able to get to it because it'll never rise to the top 3. So I think what you're trying to discover when you're asking someone for permission or to support or work with you is how acute is their need for this, which is a good predictor whether they're likely to say yes to me, or is it number 25 on their list?
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Sure. Good luck, Alexa.
Julia, want to ask your question?
Sure. I noticed earlier that you kind of split the question from Patrice into personal and professional, and so this one's more on the personal side. What's a personal habit that you intentionally developed to help you focus yourself? Because I know I tend to just jump off in a million different directions, and then they all snowball, and I commit to them all. And I do try to steer back into what is my focus and what am I trying to do at this point right now.
Are you a list person, Julia?
It's not a linear list, so does it count as a list? I'm a word map, mental map.
All right, so maybe you're not a list person then. Right now, right? Currently, okay. So here's why I ask. I think there are list people and there are not list people, and there's no judgment on them. And so if I could be crude and divide people up this way, let me tell you what I mean. List people, they make lists because they have to check things off the list. It's like an OCD thing, or a 1% of OCD, or it's like I can't relax until I've done my tasks. And those people, there's an easy answer to your question, which is make a list and prioritize the things that are important, and you'll get them done. So that's easy. The problem is, if you're not a list person, you can't tell that to a not list person, because they're like, yeah, well, I'm going to probably not make the list. And even when I do, I'm not going to do the things on there because I just got distracted by this thing over here. Right? So, so I think you probably need different strategies for focus. So the one I am a list person, so it's not as much of a challenge for me to figure out how to focus. But for people who are not list people, what I have read about, and so I can't vouch for you that this will work for you, but is more of a system of reward, where if I will allow myself to do X after I've done Y, right? And to try to have some honesty with yourself about reward for good behavior. And if you can sort of get into that a little bit, and you're making a deal with yourself, then it sort of forces yourself to prioritize and not procrastinate. But and I don't mean procrastinate in a negative way. It's just like, non-linearly weaving around, like I don't get things done linearly, so therefore I can't predict when they'll get finished. So you can try to reward yourself for reaching the end of the task. You might actually be asking something a little bit different though, which is not just like, how do you prioritize and get things done, but question about focus.
Yeah, I think a longer
right?
time scale.
Yeah, right. Well, so for longer time scale things, I think for me, that's just breaking it into shorter tasks, right? Like,
okay.
Right. So like something that would take 6 months is purely for me about, all right, break it down, work backwards, make a linear list of tasks and knock it out. You'll get it done. But I think one thing you might be asking though is many creative endeavors are not just like, let me just check this off, I can get it done right now. I need to be in the right state of mind for it, like writing. You can't just be like, okay, today I'm going to write chapter 1. Like that could take 1 day or it could take 1 year. It totally depends on your creative state of mind. So I can relate to this around music, where this happened to me just last week. I heard great new song on Spotify. I was so inspired. I'm like, I'm going down to the studio. I'm going to write a great song. I got a great idea for it. 3.5 hours later, I walked away in utter disgust. It was absolutely terrible. So frustrated. I actually have not been downstairs again since then. Creative endeavors are not linear endeavors. So for me, and so I'm taking your question around focus more towards creative pursuits. I'm looking for the triggers for inspiration. Now that was I was inspired. I just didn't have it. It was complete shit. But you're looking for maybe inspiration triggers to focus.
Okay, thanks for your response. I do think we're wired probably opposite, but interesting.
That's cool. The world needs many people who are not linear thinkers.
Totally agree. Is there anything, Dave, that we haven't asked you that we should have? That if you're talking to a bunch of students who are trying to create something from nothing?
Yeah. So, since if you're trying to go from 0 to 1, like that's the big leap, right? So, how do you know that what you're working on has a chance of success? So, the question I always ask people working on something is, what data or what testing or what feedback do you have from the market that the thing you're working on has a shot, right? You've talked to 100 people, or you've done a survey, or you made a prototype, or you just sketched something up and talked to 15 friends, or you did research, or, you can lessen the distance from 0 to 1 by having a higher confidence that the thing that you're going to make will, once you finish making it, will be in demand. And I think most people do not approach their idea this way. It's based on a personal belief, which is great. That's a great motivation. But you need to confirm your bias, your belief that it's going to happen. You don't have to, but you certainly have lower risk if you do the work to really try to gather some data that says, I actually really think this will work for these reasons. And I'm being intellectually honest about it. I'm not just looking for numbers that conveniently support my thesis. I'm looking at both sides.
I love it because it always goes back to really listening to the customer and asking yourself, are you serving a need that is there? Is ultimately what you're trying to drive to.
Yeah, the cop-out I get a lot. Last thing I'll say to Vanessa, the cop-out I get a lot is, well, I'm inventing something totally new. And Steve Jobs said, you can't ask people what their new product, do they want an iPhone when they've never seen an iPhone? And Henry Ford, couldn't say, do you want a metal horse? They just wanted faster buggies or whatever. So I get that a lot. But I'm not saying ask them, do they want to buy your exact product? But understand the need and see if the need is present.
That is a really good way to end. And look, you know, I've always enjoyed talking to you, and it's been a real pleasure for you to share all your wisdom with the students today. And I hope there's a couple of things that they, you know, take out of it. I love this idea that you're sharing around being comfortable with discomfort, because I think if you can do that, that's where the real personal growth comes from. And you had a lot of great stories around how important that is to entrepreneurs. And ultimately, it's when you fall down, how do you get yourself back up? And that all successful people, yourself included, always feel that pit in the stomach, that nervousness. Even, you know, when you've led companies that have led to $1 billion acquisition, you still get that pit. And so I think it's good for them to know that they're not faking it. They're not, you know, not supposed to be here. We're all feeling that. And I think that's a really powerful message for students to be hearing, is that all of us, you know, are scared of failing, but we go out there and we keep going at it. And so, you know, with that, it's a wrap. And I hope our listeners are energized to get moving and to turn their potential into action and create something amazing. So thank you, Dave, on behalf of all the students and Kinetic creators.
Thank you, Dr. Chan. It's great to meet everyone, and thank you for having me. It's an honor.
Thanks, Dave. We'll talk soon.